Why did your dad say that it was a good idea for you to go? I mean, just
I
a
mean,
lesson
you know,
learned, or?
coming when I saw, I mean, just to give examples of what was standard practice, you'd take these companies public with no earnings and just a projection and obviously a highly charismatic salesperson
That works well.
as a CEO, and you would wrap these kind of like options into the security that allowed it to be unraveled at some point, and you would have a bid-ask spread of, you know, you take the company public at 5, but the bid was at 4, and, you know, unsuspecting retail investors didn't think much of that, but you're actually taking a bid-ask spread of 20%, which is just enormous, not to mention the fact that the company took an underwriting fee and it also took options, and so they were taking money every which way. And but that allowed me to see what was going on, for example, in my father's bank account with his Swiss bank, where kind of I started asking about the fees, and they said, well, actually they're very low. I remember this banker saying, because we just charge a custodial fee. And I remember looking at the brokerage statement, and I was telling my father, you're receiving a bond coupon, and they've charged you a processing fee for the bond coupon. Where on earth does a bond coupon require a processing fee? And my father came and asked the question. He actually brought me to one of the meetings, and they kind of hummed and hawed. So I had now, and my father had this approach to a banker that they're a bit like a doctor, you know, and you really do trust a doctor to give a professional opinion, and he felt like it should be the same at a bank. And I started telling my father stories about how I worked at a bank, and these people were all, you know, I mean, there was a famous expression, you probably know this, some people who've worked, quote, on Wall Street, as you would have brokers on the 14th, 15th floor who would boast about ripping the client's face off, you know. Wow. So it was in a way, it was also a learning curve. I mean, we were immigrants. My father had grown up in Israel. My mother on a kibbutz, not a kibbutz, on a moshav, but in a sort of like socialist environment. My mother had grown up in South Africa. And so I think that we as a family were going up a learning curve and becoming more deeply understanding of sophisticated things like financial markets. And he was going up a learning curve. So he feels like, because of my experience at D.H. Blair, he went up that learning curve. I think he would have gone up that learning curve if I'd gone to work at Goldman Sachs, which probably, if I'd continued with the interviews, would have been an option for me. But I was just too desperate to get off the train tracks. You know, that was another part of me.
Well, Goldman Sachs are also good at extracting money from their clients. But I apologize again to William Blair, which I'm actually a big fan of. That was D.H. Blair. But your dad gave you $1 million to invest, and later with two associates gave you $15 million.
Yeah.
Why did he trust you with so much money, or was it not a meaningful thing?
No, that was very that was very meaningful. That was everything.
So why did he do that?
I ask myself the question to this day. You know, he's around. You could ask him. He might give you an answer.
Oh, we might do a postscript. We'll do a Zoom call with your dad.
That'd be quite cool. I've just been lucky enough to spend time with him over the last couple of days, and he's a very different personality to me. In that, so I am good with numbers relatively, but I'm not that good on the EQ side, at least not compared to him. And he, on the other hand, is just amazing with relationships, but maybe not as good at numbers as I am, something like that. But he also had some pretty amazing. He was a farm boy, wasn't up to much, but somehow the Israeli military saw leadership qualities in him and took him and put him through an officer's course and put him into various leadership positions in the Israeli army for the time that he was there. And I think that, at least in his case, leadership is taking bold decisions. It's also, and I've learned this, you know, you either trust somebody or you don't. And if you do trust them, plunge in with both feet. And it's kind of scary, but he's capable of doing that. And I think that he's faced very dangerous situations where his life was at risk multiple times, and he's seen friends die in various wars. And so I think that you have a very different approach to decision making and, in a certain way, risk taking. Once you've seen that, investing all of your liquid net with your son is a no-brainer and just easy, I suppose. But it scared the hell out of me, scared the living daylights out of me, because I knew that there wasn't anything else around. If I got that wrong, he would be relying on his business for taking care of him in retirement. So, and I think that it made me more risk averse than I would have been otherwise, but perhaps I would have been very risk averse anyway.
Because you write in your book that given your family's history of loss in Nazi Germany, that you're nervous about losing money, you don't like debt, and you explain that's one reason for having Berkshire in a portfolio. It's ballast financially and emotionally. But you also write that investors need to understand their relationship with money. And with that understanding, you could make adjustments. I thought that was a very astute observation and something I hadn't previously thought about. I was wondering how you got to that conclusion. You obviously think about a great deal about how to be a better investor, how to be a better person. How'd you arrive at these conclusions? I thought that was really interesting.
You know, what I'm realizing is that we're both, I'm realizing now, Steve, out of the box thinkers, and that's kind of like a hackneyed phrase, but some people's minds don't go in straight lines. And I think that those of us who have minds that don't go in straight lines don't understand why they don't go in straight lines. They just do. They make jumps in ways that other minds don't make, and we don't even realize that those jumps are unusual. But I think that my point that you're getting at, and it's, I guess maybe it should be blindingly obvious, is that every single individual's perspective is different, and and even before that, so a point that I've made many times, and people always sort of like are surprised by it when I make it. When you read a story in the financial press that looks at the moves of one investor or another, most of the time those stories don't show the move in the context of the whole portfolio. The person where I think it's potentially the most damaging or misleading is this guy Carl Icahn, who I think has made a exquisite art form, if you like, of revealing some of what he's doing to the market for his purposes. But the reality is far more complex. So I remember reading somewhere that one of the things that he would do is he would establish a position that was neutral using options in a company, and then just do stuff to increase the volatility. He didn't know if it was going to go up or down, but it didn't matter so long as the volatility increased. And it appeared to people that he was either long or short, but he neutralized that out through options, and he was just pushing volatility, but that was not the agenda that he appeared to have. So not everything is what it seems to be, if you like. I've been reading a book that is going to be coming out shortly by a guy called Chris Chabris, called Nobody's Fool. And he's the famous man behind the experiment of the gorillas, where you count the basketball players and you see the gorillas, and nobody sees the gorillas the first time around. Things aren't what you see them. Our minds play tricks with us. So that perspective of, you cannot really evaluate a move that somebody's made if you don't see their whole portfolio, because otherwise you're just not seeing the whole agenda and the whole picture. And in the same way, I know clearly, I think that in part, just to try and answer your question a little bit better, is that at the time that I'm writing that book, I've already been spending an enormous amount of time with Mohnish Pabrai, and I'm seeing that he has an extraordinarily different approach to money than I do. And this comes through even things that we've been discussing recently. It's well known that he loves Turkey and I don't, for example. And for him, I don't enjoy going to a casino and sort of like placing bets, and even with games like blackjack. And blackjack, the odds are pretty good. You can argue that in certain casino tables, if you count and what have you, you can do almost as well as the house. He doesn't mind that. He doesn't mind seeing the pile of chips go down for half the evening because he's using a strategy that will eventually get them back. And I just don't like that. So he clearly has a different approach to money than I do. And I started asking myself why. And I think that you can tie that to experiences that people have had in their childhood. So I think that that's extremely important to understand in ourselves, rather than me sitting there. And I guess it also came from this. I'm sitting there going, why am I not able to take the same decisions that Mohnish Pabrai is able to take? Why am I not able to develop the same degree of comfort? And when you ask the question enough, and he laughs, he says, yeah, I'm going to tell Guy Spier this idea, and he's going to go into his bomb shelter. He calls it the bomb shelter. He called me up, he'll say, have you come out of the bomb shelter yet? And so asking that question, I started realizing that it's got to do with our very different childhood experiences. And possibly even before that, a very different approach to what life is and what the world is about. I think that if you grow up in a Jewish environment or a Judeo-Christian environment even, there is history, there is tragedy. Things unfold for the better or for the worse. But if you grow up in as I understand it, and I'm not claiming any expertise here, there's the idea in the Hindu world of reincarnation of souls, and there's a circular life. History doesn't unfold towards some destination. Life just repeats itself, and maybe in a world where life just repeats itself endlessly, you have a different approach to money because it kind of comes and goes, whereas that's not the feeling. There's tragedy, there's loss, and then there's rebuilding. You try and hold on to it, something like that. And it seems to me that if we understand all of the stuff behind, all of those kind of psychological underpinnings and just the perspective of consolidating the person's balance sheet, we do better. Yeah.
So you're most famous for Mohnish for having lunch with Warren Buffett. Yeah. And you underwrote a third of the cost of that lunch, $250,000. Now, it was a little while ago when $250,000 was worth more than it is today. You're a wealthy guy and were even then, but it's like an expensive lunch. What did you hope to get out of it? And obviously it's been worth much more than $250,000 to you, but what's the moral of that? What should we take away? What should we learn from that?
You know, I mean, a phrase that has just stayed with me so often, which is slightly unrelated, but maybe I'll find a way to make it related, is if you want an adventure, tell the truth. And I think that in this case, it's not so. In this case, if you want your life to be an adventure, if you want to live an interesting life, pick up those low-cost lottery tickets, and actually even that you could argue that was not a low-cost lottery ticket. It was actually a pretty expensive lottery ticket.
Pretty expensive.
But if you can afford it. And I remember on an Israeli interviewer asking me, so, how do you decide to invest in a lunch? And I said, look, you probably don't want to do it if it's more than 5% of your net worth, or probably even less. But pick up those lottery tickets because you live a more interesting life. And actually, if I stop and think about it with you right now, so there was a huge element of that was just saying, I mean, there are people who spend more money on a motor car. And what's the motor car going to get you? It's going to get you a few nice drives. It's going to get you a little bit of envy. It's going to get you some nice experience. I'm not saying it's a terrible thing, but the range of outcomes and the possibilities that unfold for your life when you go and have lunch with Warren Buffett are way beyond. I mean, so you have a huge, so from the car enthusiast's perspective, you're not going to get all those wonderful drives in that car. So they could say that the downside is less protected because it really gets one stupid lunch, and how long could the lunch last? But the upside is far more likely to be infinite in the lunch case. So why not pick up that lottery ticket if you can afford it? And actually, why not pick up a lot more lottery tickets? I mean, I think there's a book or a movie or something, the year of saying yes. It's my year of saying yes. In a certain way, that's saying pick up the lottery tickets. There's so many lottery tickets that are offered to us. And we just have to be smart about them. So, I don't think that the thrill of jumping off a cliff in a wingsuit is worth the downside, which is a great big fat zero. And I think that many of us probably, even in the financial markets, pick up those kinds of lottery tickets. But if you can see that the downside is totally affordable and limited, why not get more of those things that are unlimited upside? So I think that's an enormous lesson. And to put that into more specific terms, if I know that somebody's interesting, or I've met somebody who's interesting, or where I kind of get the feeling that there's potential there for something, it's okay to travel across the planet to see them, even just for dinner. And I actually did that. Based on that reasoning, I flew basically to California from Zurich to celebrate a friend's birthday because I knew it would be a special event. And that is not a dumb thing to do. because you're putting yourself in the presence of potentiality, which creates all sorts of other things. And so I think that's just an enormous lesson for me. And what's also very interesting is that Mohnish saw that and I didn't. He needed to spell it out for me. And when he spelled it out for me, I saw it. And I think that there was an element of me that wanted to have the adventure if there was an adventure. And in a certain way, I got doing that would get me the adventure with Mohnish anyway.